Nothing bad has happened yet. That's what he said to me. His thumb was on my cheek, wiping away a tear. He and his two friends had me cornered against my car in Baltimore. I was 19, and I was certain I was about to die. So I looked him in the eye, and I told him a lie so insane, it actually saved my life. So let's start first story. Back in the early 90s, when I was 19, my brother and his wife were newlyweds and living in Baltimore. I am from Maryland myself, but I had not spent any time in the city at that point. I knew it was not entirely safe in certain areas, but I was just going straight to my brother's house. So it would be fine, right? Well, I ended up turning on to the wrong street, Franklin Avenue. And back then, it was just a stretch of abandoned gas stations, sketchy bars, and boarded-up houses. There were a few men walking in the middle of the street, drinking out of brown paper bags. I knew that I had messed up big time. But instead of freaking out and getting even more lost, I pulled into an abandoned gas station where there was a bank of payphones and parked about 10 feet from them, then hopped out to call my brother. Remember, this was about 30 years ago. No cell phones in those days. He was impatient at first because my brother knew the city quite well, but this was my first time driving in it, and I was trying to write down his directions as he gave them to me. Just then, I looked over at my car, and the three men who were walking down the street were now leaning against it, two on the passenger side and one against my driver's side door. They were staring at me with their arms crossed. I began to silently cry, thankful that I had on sunglasses at the time. My brother heard me sniffling and said, "Why do you sound so upset? I am just giving you directions." I could not tell him what was going on as the men were within earshot. I wrote down the rest of the directions, put them in my pocket, and began walking back toward my car. The men leaning against my door reached up and wiped the tears from one cheek. Then he said, "Why are you crying? Hun, nothing bad has happened yet." Without hesitation, I responded, "I just shot my boyfriend. The cops are." That was all I got out. The three men had taken off in separate directions at full sprint. If I had not been gifted that lie from my guardian angels or whoever, who knows what could have happened to me that day. I grew up in a nice neighborhood in Maryland about 15 minutes from the border to Washington, D.C. We never had any serious crimes in our area, just a typical petty theft from people leaving their car doors unlocked. It was a chilly, gloomy Saturday in October of 1993. I was 8 years old back then. My brother James was 12. We had just left his friend's house after playing street hockey in his driveway, and we had to get back home around 5:30. His house is a couple of blocks away from the elementary school, and across the street from there is a pretty big-sized park. Along that road, there is a fence that extends from the park's entrance to a cul-de-sac where we lived. My brother and I approached a nearby four-way stop and noticed a white 1990 Toyota Camry sitting there. We did not think anything of it and continued down the sidewalk toward the school. I was talking to him about the Washington Redskins and how we could ride in to get an autograph from Art Monk. He is a famous football player. I noticed that James was oddly quiet during my rambling. I asked him if he was listening, and he responded, "Keep talking, act normal, and do not look back." "Okay." Confused and nervous, I responded, "Okay, what is going on?" My brother had been paying attention to the car ever since we saw it. It was now driving slowly behind us. We played it cool and kept walking our normal pace. As we were approaching the school, my brother put his hand on my chest, which made me stop immediately. He turned back and glanced at the driver. Now, I was not sure if he was trying to see how the driver would react if we wanted to make a move across the street to park, or if he was trying to see a license plate. However, when we stopped, the car stopped. This time, I got a good look. The driver was a female with brunette hair. She looked almost drugged out. She never blinked. She just stared straight ahead. Not at us, not to the side. Directly straight. The passenger was the intimidating one. He was a redhead, long hair, and he had this angry look in his eyes. To be honest, he kind of looked like an evil carrot top. After getting a good look and realizing the situation we were in, I began to get nervous. My breathing slowed. My legs went numb. And I looked at my brother, and he just said, "Keep walking." What was weird about that day was that there were not any cars on the road. It felt like a ghost town. It was just us and them. We continued walking toward the next block when suddenly the cars started merging into the other lane. They were attempting to block us off, and then who knows what. My brother, being the older one, looked around before saying, "On the count of 3, follow me and run as fast as you can." Before I could even say anything, he started his countdown. 3, 2, 1. We took off running, my brother charging ahead and me trying to keep up. The Camry accelerates. James is able to make it across the street, but the car almost hits me, missing by inches. The Camry turns around and comes after us again. My brother sprints across toward the cul-de-sac, and I followed the best I could. I then realized he was making a run for our friend's house who lived on this block. Once we got to his doorstep, we immediately started ringing the doorbell and banging on the front door like crazy. The car pulls up and the passenger emerges from the car. As soon as he did, my friend's dad opens the door. We then rush inside. Carrot Top hops back in the Camry, and they speed off. My friend's dad runs out toward the car as it took off, yelling something as he tried to get a license plate. My brother and I were pretty shaken up. And even though we lived only a block away, we called our dad to come pick us up. We contacted police and filed a report, and they said they would keep their eyes open. The following Monday, we notified the elementary school about the ordeal. However, they did not do much to let the public know. At first, it was not until a week later they sent out a flyer to the rest of the parents, and the cops began patrolling the neighborhood more often. During that same week, 3 other cases were reported involving a white Camry following kids around and trying to kidnap them. There was one I heard that was even more terrifying than our experience, where the kids were jumping through backyards because Carrot Top was chasing after them. After that week, everything eventually calmed down. No arrests were ever made. I do not know if they moved on to another town and tried the same thing there. All I know is that they had our neighborhood terrified for an entire year, and it took a while for things to seem normal again. I live in the mountains of western Maryland now. A few months ago, I was out hiking with a friend. We were about 6 miles into an 8 miles loop we had done several times before. We decided to stop and take some pictures of the trail summit. This area of the trail had a park, benches, tables, and a parking lot. We were sitting and chatting after taking a few snapshots when I noticed a man just walking around the parking lot by himself. He seemed to be wandering aimlessly and staring at his feet. What confused me was the man was wearing jeans and a button-down shirt, not exactly hiking attire. We eventually set off on the last 2-mile leg of the trail. This part goes downhill to the headquarters of the park and into the mountainside. At the end is a second parking lot where our car was. You do not have a whole lot of visibility from the trail, and you have to walk in single file because of how narrow it is. I was walking in front and talking to my friend who was behind me. I turned to look at her, and I see the same man from before behind her following at a close distance. I immediately got this gut-wrenching feeling. I noticed that he did not have a backpack on or hiking gear, and was not even wearing boots. There was something about the look in his eyes that really spooked me. So, after a bit more walking, he continues to follow very close. I say to my friend that I have to tie my shoe as a reason to step off the trail, and let him pass just in case he was only following closely because he wanted to go faster than us. She seemed to catch on to what I was doing, and we step off the trail. He looks startled when my friend politely says hello. He just stared at us. This was when I noticed that he was carrying a stick. Then, without saying a word, he passes us. We wait for him to get some distance ahead of us, but he immediately slows down. We wait a bit longer until he gets to the furthest part of the trail that is still within our sight, and he turns around and looks up at us. We decided that something feels too off about this guy, and we did not want to have to pass him again. So we turn around and walk back up the trail toward the park. After a few minutes of backtracking, I look behind us and see him walking up the trail as well. I tell my friend to go a little faster. We book it and got back to the first park area and then begin to strategize and wait, deciding that we should remain here to see if he emerges again. There were more people around here, so we felt safer waiting it out. About 20 minutes go by and nothing. We started talking about how this could have meant that he kept going on the trail and is now long gone. or is waiting in a more deserted area to possibly ambush us. We then see an older couple coming from the trail in that direction. We approached them and asked if they saw anyone on their way up. They told us that they saw a young man sitting on a rock about halfway down. They described a man who had been following us. We explain our interaction with him and get into a back-and-forth conversation on whether or not he was a threat. That is when the husband finally interjects and says, "We should call a ranger." He was not just sitting there. He had a knife and seemed to be sharpening that stick he was holding. The wife was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, but we ended up calling a ranger after hearing that. The nice couple escorted us back to our car to make sure we got there safely. The rangers contacted us later on. They walked the trail, but by then the moan was long gone. I wish I knew where he went off to, but I am glad to know that my instincts are legit when it comes to sensing danger. I have been a fan of your channel for some time now. I have noticed that you have done some first-hand accounts of murders that have taken place in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I think every family has a story where they were a small part of some very unfortunate history. When you announced that you were doing a video on Maryland, I had to call my Uncle Roger. This is his story, and I will be writing it from his perspective as he told it to me. March 29th, 1982 is a day that I will never forget. I grew up in Columbia, Maryland. Columbia was known as a quiet, safe town where middle-class families lived and commuted to work in Baltimore, which is about 30 minutes from there. I was 17 at the time, and I used to ride my bike down one of the narrow pathways to the village center. That day, I was just going to grab a pop from one of the shops there and then maybe waste a few quarters at the local arcade afterward. Mom was working late at the hospital that day, so I had some time to kill. I was about halfway down the path when I saw a woman walking ahead of me. She was maybe in her late 20s, wearing a light jacket and jeans with her hair pulled back into a ponytail. I did not think much of it at first. People are always walking to the village center, but I remember specifically she was singing a tune to herself. It was soft but clear, like she did not care who heard, and I knew the song. Ain't No Mountain High Enough. They played it on the radio all the time, not wanting to startle her by flying past on my bike. I slowed down. She must have heard the squeak of my brakes, 'cause she glanced back at me when I stopped. Her eyes met for a second, and I felt a little embarrassed. She had this tired look in her eyes, but her smile was warm. Sorry, I said. It is okay, kid. Let me get out of your way. I gave a dumb nod, the kind you do when you are an awkward teenager who does not know how to communicate with adults. She waved me on. I pedaled past and made my way toward the village center. The rest of that day was uneventful for me. This encounter may not sound like anything special, but it turns out I was one of the last people to see that woman alive. Her name was Elaine Lee Cadney. She got into a car at some point after I passed her on the path, a brown Ford LTD, but no one could provide an accurate description of whoever was driving that car. Her body was later discovered on a vacant lot nearby. She had been raped and murdered. Despite police efforts, the case remained unsolved for nearly 4 decades. It left a lasting impact on the community due to the brutal nature of the killing. Columbia's reputation as a safe town also died that day. In 2021, a breakthrough in DNA evidence linked a man named Howard Jackson Bradbury Jr. to the crime. This development provided some closure, but questions still remain about the exact circumstances, potential accomplices, or why Cadney was targeted. This murder is still considered a significant unsolved tragedy in Maryland's history. Growing up in Maryland, I have had my fair share of weird and creepy encounters. This particular incident has left me truly horrified. Even now, when I think about it, I cannot help but to feel uneasy. It was back in September of last year. These events took place, ironically, on Friday the 13th. My boyfriend Zach was visiting when this happened. At first, everything was going great and all seemed normal. But when Friday came around, that is when things went south. Zach and I decided to go to the local mall to see the new Beetlejuice movie, and I was wearing a black and white dress with flat black slippers. We took a lift to get there, and nothing seemed weird at first, but when we walked inside the mall, that is when I saw this man. He looked like he was in his 50s or 60s, overweight, and had gray hair. He also wore a thick pair of glasses with a blue shirt on and shorts. He was staring at us and not trying to hide it either. Then we went to go grab some food at a Chinese restaurant in the mall. Once we sat down, I noticed that the man had followed us there. At first, I was willing to dismiss him as just some gawking creep, but then I started to get uncomfortable. We still had some time to kill, so we stopped by the bookstore. After browsing around, we walked out and I saw the man again shadowing us. I would have mentioned something to Zach, but I suddenly had to use the restroom bad. It was at that point I was regretting the Chinese. Zach waited outside the restrooms, so I did not worry about the man following me in there. But there was something about this guy that really unnerved me. I did not know if he was waiting for Zach to leave me by myself before he made some kind of move. When I walked out, my stalker was nowhere in sight, and I was relieved. Zach and I went to go see the movie, and I tried to put this in the back of my mind. By the time the end credits were rolling, I had almost forgotten about the creep in the glasses. That was until when we got up to leave. I saw him sitting a few rows behind us. He was staring directly at me again. I was so freaked out that I ran out of the theater and into the lobby to call my mom. I told her what was going on, and she said to go get security, but the only problem was that the mall was now dead, and I did not see any guards in sight. I lost sight of the man in the exiting crowd. We eventually took a lift back to my house. On the way home, I noticed a blue car following us, and I had a feeling I knew who was behind the wheel. It finally turned down another street about 10 minutes or so from where I live. Ever since that night from time to time, I swear I see that same blue car parked in the street outside my house. Perhaps I am just being paranoid, but whenever I go out with friends or to run some errands in town, I feel that someone is watching me. I am sharing the story as a warning to please pay attention to your surroundings. Even if you are on a date or with people you trust, you never know who is watching. There is always a reason to be afraid. The story of the man on the mountain path did not end when the nice couple escorted us to our car. That was merely the end of the immediate threat. The real story, the one that settled deep into my bones and began to fester, was the aftermath. It was the slow, creeping realization that the peace I had so carefully cultivated in my mountain home was an illusion, as fragile as the suburban safety of my childhood. The ghosts of Franklin Avenue and the white Toyota were not gone. They had simply been waiting, and this new encounter had summoned them from the shadows. The drive home with Maya was silent and thick with unspoken fear. The winding mountain roads, usually a source of joy and freedom, now felt like a trap. Every hairpin turn, every darkened stretch of forest, held the potential for an ambush. My hands were clenched on the steering wheel, my knuckles white, my eyes darting constantly to the rear-view mirror. Maya just stared out the passenger window, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. We did not talk. There was nothing to say. The shared experience was a heavy blanket between us, smothering any attempt at normal conversation. When I finally pulled into her driveway, she practically jumped out of the car before it had fully stopped. "Call me when you're home," she said, her voice tight. She did not wait for a reply. She walked quickly to her front door, fumbling with her keys, disappearing inside without a backward glance. I knew she was scared. I was terrified, but I also felt a pang of something else, a strange, isolating loneliness. Our shared ordeal had not brought us closer. It fractured the easy comfort of our friendship, revealing a crack through which the cold reality of the world had poured in. I watched her lights go on in her house before I pulled away. The 10-minute drive to my own secluded cabin was the longest of my life. Every rustle of leaves in my headlights was the moan with the sharpened stick. Every pair of headlights in my rear-view mirror was his, following me home. When I finally turned into my gravel driveway and saw my little cabin, its warm yellow lights a beacon in the darkness, I felt a wave of relief so intense it made me dizzy. I locked the car, ran to the door, and slammed and bolted it behind me, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was safe, but I did not feel safe. That night, I slept with all the lights on. Every creak of the old house settling, every sigh of the wind outside, was a footstep on my porch. I kept picturing the man's flat, dead eyes, the way he held that sharpened stick. I saw the husband's face, serious and grim, as he said, "He had a knife." The ranger had called back about an hour after we got home to say they had swept the trail but found no one. They took our statements and said they would increase patrols in the area. It was a professional, reassuring response, but it did nothing to quell the storm raging inside me. The next few days were a blur of anxiety. I called in sick to work, unable to face the 45-minute drive into town. I jumped every time the phone rang. I checked the locks on my doors and windows a dozen times a day. The peace of my mountain retreat had been violated. The forest was no longer a place of solace. It was a place of hiding. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. This new fear began to bleed into my old ones. The memory of the 3 men on Franklin Avenue, a story I had not thought about in years, came back with a vivid, terrifying clarity. I could feel the man's thumb on my cheek again, hear his gravelly voice in my ear. The image of the white Toyota, with its zombie-like driver and the furious, red-haired Carrot Top, replayed in my mind on a loop. I was not just remembering these events, I was reliving them. The man on the mountain had not just been a new threat. He had been a key, unlocking a room in my mind where I had stored all my old fears, and now they were all roaming free, colliding and merging into one monstrous entity. A week after the hike, Maya called me. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was distant. We met at a neutral coffee shop in town, a place full of people and noise. It felt safer than my cabin or her house. She was already there when I arrived, a cup of coffee untouched in front of her. She looked tired. "I am sorry I have been so out of it," I started, sitting down across from her. "It is not just you, Clara," she said, cutting me off. "It is me, too. I cannot stop thinking about it. About him." She took a shaky breath. "I keep seeing his face. And that stick. God, that stick." "I know," I said, my own voice barely a whisper. "Me too." We sat in silence for a moment, the clatter of the coffee shop around us feeling a world away. "I do not think I can go hiking on that trail again," she said finally, "or maybe any trail for a while." "I understand," I said, and I did, but her words also filled me with a new kind of dread. The moan on the mountain had not just scared us, he had taken something from us. He had taken our joy, our freedom, our sense of security in the place we loved most. "It is more than that, though," Maya continued, her eyes fixed on her coffee cup. "It has made me think about all the other stuff, the things you have told me, about what happened to you in Baltimore, and with your brother. It is like it is all connected somehow, like it is all part of the same story." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. She was right. It was all connected. It was the story of my life. A life punctuated by these strange, terrifying encounters. A life lived under a shadow of fear that I had never been able to fully escape. I had always thought of them as isolated incidents, bad luck, random acts of darkness, in an otherwise bright world. But now, seeing them through Maya's eyes, I saw a pattern, a thread of menace that had woven its way through my entire existence. That conversation with Maya was a turning point. It was the moment I stopped running from my fears and started to face them. I realized that these encounters were not just random events. They were a part of who I was. And if I was ever going to truly feel safe, I needed to understand them. I needed to understand why these things kept happening to me. I started by writing it all down. I bought a new journal and began to document every encounter, every memory, in as much detail as I could remember. I wrote about the men on Franklin Avenue, the lie that saved me, the look on the big man's face as he ran. I wrote about the white Toyota, the cold dread in my 8-year-old body, the fury in Carrot Top's eyes. I wrote about Elaine Cadney, the girl my uncle saw singing on the path, a life extinguished too soon. I wrote about the man in the glasses at the mall, his persistent, unnerving stare. And I wrote about the man on the mountain, his dead eyes, his sharpened stick. As I wrote, I began to see things more clearly. I saw my own reactions, my own instincts, in a new light. The lie on Franklin Avenue was not just a lucky break. It was a testament to my own resourcefulness under pressure. My brother's quick thinking on the day of the white Toyota was not just a sibling's protection. It was a lesson in situational awareness. My gut-wrenching feeling on the mountain trail was not paranoia. It was a primal, life-saving instinct. I was not just a passive victim in these stories. I was a survivor,